Hello and welcome to the first ever Return Week facilitated by the Palestinian Return Centre, which seeks to mobilise Palestinians and other allies around the world to call for and support the Palestinian right of return. I am Celine Al-Saleh and I'll be moderating this webinar. I'm a member of the Students Association for Palestine, and today's webinar is Envisioned, the Right of Return, where Dr. Salman Abu Sitteh will be discussing his return plan. The My Return campaign is a popular voluntary initiative launched by the London-based Palestinian Return Centre in cooperation with national and international pro-Palestine partners. The campaign was first launched in Jordan in cooperation with the Palestinian Committee in the Jordanian Parliament. The campaign culminates in a petition that calls for and reaffirms the Palestinian right to return. The campaign seeks to turn such an inalienable right into an international cause. The campaign seeks to garner the largest possible number of signatures on a petition confirming Palestinian refugees' devotion to their right of return. The petition clearly states that it rejects the US deal for the century and any other initiative undermining Palestinians internationally. Israel and the US have never ceased to undermine such an inalienable Palestinian right by denying the refugee status of displaced Palestinians inside and outside occupied Palestine, for example, by moving their embassy to Jerusalem or suspending aid to Palestinian refugees. The campaign is based on individual signatures on My Return petition through its official website, www.myreturn.net. The petition has already garnered over 550,000 signatures, and we would like you to add your signature. And if you have the means to, please donate to UNRWA. If you have questions for Dr. Salman Abu Sitteh, please leave them in the comments section below. Dr. Salman Abu Sitteh is the founder and president of Palestine Now Society, London, dedicated to the documentation of Palestine's land and people. He is the author of several books on Palestine, including the compendium Atlas of Palestine 1917 to 1966, the Atlas of the Return Journey, the Atlas of Palestine 1871 to 1877, and Mapping My Return, a Palestinian memoir. The first and another book called The First Nakba Memoir, and that is published in English, and it's about southern Palestine. He wrote 400 papers and articles on the Palestinian refugees, the right of return, history of al-Nakba, and human rights. Dr. Salman, thank you so much for having us. And we would like to kick off the discussion by asking, why is the right of return important?
Thank you, Celine. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for hosting me. Yes, it's a very important question. Why is the right of return important? It is important because it's the only key to peace in the region, which has been subject to so many wars. It is actually the only balsam or cure for the biggest crime which befell Palestinians and Palestine in its 4,000-year history. It is a story which is to be remembered by all Palestinians on all the world, which will give them responsibility to remove that crime. It is Nakba. And Nakba is defined as the attack and depopulation of Palestinians from their homeland by an army of foreign settlers composed of 120,000 soldiers in 9 brigades and in 31 military operations. They attacked and depopulated 560 cities and villages in Palestine. By attacking them, they depopulated them and they made them refugees. which are today 7 million Palestinians who are refugees within sight of their homes and their villages. This crime is unprecedented in all colonial history. Why? Because it was planned and executed under the glare of cameras and television lights, under the auspices of the United Nations, where the so called Western world was watching, and it was done in 8 months immediately after the Second World War, and it is continuous until today. That crime can never be accepted, can never be forgiven, and therefore it must be remedied. And the remedy is within sight. Now, why is it so? Why is it so unusual? It's the longest war against a people, 100 years of war against defenseless people. It's the only settler colonial project today. It's the only one which is entertained by Western countries and their supporters. It's the only project which is in existence today which promotes occupation, racism, apartheid, and a great array of war crimes. This was the invasion of those Jewish European settlers from Poland and Russia to a land they have never seen before. It's a land located in the heart of the Arab world. It's a land which is ancient. In its villages, Jesus Christ has walked and lived. It is a crime which is in existence and in a manner which is so unusual in the history of today. The colonial settler movement worked against geography and history. So that's why I believe it could not last. This is committed a crime unprecedented. Not only it happened in 1948 and even before, not only it happened since then, 72 years later, but actually to do this heinous crime, it took Zionism to wage 11 kinds of wars against defenseless Palestinians. 11 kinds of wars against Palestinians. This is unprecedented in colonial history. What are these 11 kinds of wars? I don't mean battles, because there are so many of these battles. I mean 11 kinds of wars. The first kind of war against Palestinians is a military one, which we know it's intended to conquer and seize the land. That is the first war. The second war is silencing the voice of the victims. Palestinians are not allowed to speak about the Nakba. Nakba is denied, refugees expulsion, and the dozens of massacres are not mentioned, are not reported. And if it is reported, it is assumed to be against law in some countries. The perpetrators of wars of aggression and its victims, on the other hand, they are reversed. We are supposed to be, in Western eyes, to be the victims, and the criminal is the criminal is supposed to be the victim, and we are the aggressors. This is unusual in the history of the world, that the roles of the victim and the aggressor are reversed in the eyes of Western countries. The third war waged against Palestinians is political. The US and many Western countries constantly vote against United Nations action, which is intended to penalize and punish Israel for its crimes. They always vote against that with veto and by other means. They don't allow the international law to be implemented. The fourth war waged against Palestinians is geographical. The Israeli maps deleted 55,000 Palestinian names. We have them in the Atlas of Palestine. These names are describing the Palestinian landscape describing the villages and towns. And Israel, when they deleted these 55,000 names created by the people of the land over at least 2,000 years, they replaced them with only 6,000 names created artificially by names of by a committee, not by the people over so many years. Now, the fifth war against Palestinians is historical. The historical record of Palestine in the last 2,000 years since Jesus Christ until the First World War was deleted completely. They are never taught in Israeli textbooks. It's vacuum. The Palestinians who lived for 2,000 years are not mentioned. And this deletion is, of course, is a great crime against humanity. They think by doing so, they will make Palestine a land without people. The sixth war against Palestinians is archaeological. And in the destruction of 560 Palestinians' villages, the Israelis went systematically destroying all archaeological items in the village. In other words, they want to say that there were no people here and that they have no history. And this is against a crime with UNESCO, for example, will be against that. The seventh war against the Palestinians is a religious or racist war. God is recruited to win that war. It is claimed that all the Jews are one race and they originated from Palestine, and after 2,000 years of absence, they decided to return to where? To the land God given them. But we tell them, in all your story, we never left the land. The eighth war against Palestinians is the defamation. Anyone who explains the facts and the truth about Palestine, even among respected scholars or UN officials, they are given a certificate of evil. They are not allowed to speak the truth. And this defamation is the weapon they use against all those people who speak the truth. The ninth war against Palestinians is legal. Domestic law in Western countries, particularly in the United States and Germany, criminalize support for BDS, criminalize those who speak about Nakba, and those who criticize actual Israeli crimes which are reported in the United Nations and seen on television screens. The 10th war against Palestinians is economic. They cut the resources of their livelihood. In Gaza, the imposed blockade against Gaza is described as incremental genocide. And in the West Bank, Israel holds the economic freedom of the West Bank by the throat and converts the people to be economic hostages. Now there is 11th war against the Palestinians, which is not found in any other colonial project. It is the disabling war, that is shooting the knees of the protesters to make them disabled, to kill the children, to burn the children, to create people or a nation of disabled people so that they seek food and just minimum livelihood and stop defining their rights of freedom. Now, all these things are unprecedented at all. And therefore, I would say that this is a very grim image. Are we then to give up? Are we to surrender? This is never a question. We never have given up in the last 100 years, and we will never give up in the future. And I say to you, Celine, you are the young people of Palestine. 75% of Palestinians are young people like you. You are now leading the demand for the right of return home. You have not forgotten. Half of the Palestinians today are on Palestinian soil, but the other half, like you, are exiled in the world. This is a bad thing, but it has a good element in it that you raise the banner of Palestine in many countries in the world, in Europe, in the United States, in Japan, in South America. So the silencing of the Palestinian people did not succeed. And therefore, we then should actually build on that. And I would say that is why the right of return has three elements which every Palestinian remembers. Number one, the right of return is sacred to every Palestinian in his heart and his mind. Second, the right of return is legal. It is enshrined in every article of international law. The resolution 194 calling for the return of the refugees has been affirmed by the United Nations more than 130 times since 1948. So what is stopping that? What is stopping that? Obviously, what's stopping that is the support by the Western countries for Israeli occupation apartheid. Do we give up? No way. We have created plans so that the right of return is feasible. People ask me, is it feasible? You say, yes, it is feasible. Do you agree with that, Celine? Is it feasible?
I hope
Well,
so.
let me explain how it is feasible. And before I do that, I would like to say one thing. When I tell people in Europe, good, well meaning people in Europe, that we have a plan to allow the refugees to return home, they say, how come? The Palestine is now Israel and it's packed with Jews, and if you return, you will make a new Nakba for the Jews. I have no respect for this question because it is a racist question. It is immoral question. It is illegal question. If someone kills your family and takes your home and he sits in it, are you not allowed to claim your home? Of course you are allowed. And if he stays there and keep killing your people, would you tolerate that? The answer is no. Therefore, the continuation of a crime is not condoning the crime. And that's even a more reason that the killer, that the burglar, that the thief must be stopped. Otherwise, the whole world will be a jungle. And therefore, we should not accept this argument. But we made studies, extensive studies, which has shown that the right of return for Palestinians is feasible, meaning that it will mean slightest dislocation to a small number of the present occupants. They have no right to be in our homes, but the people who will be adversely affected by the return of the refugees is very limited. I can show you that. Could I see the first slide, please? Amr, could you show me the first slide? Yes, this first slide shows you the area occupied by the Zionist settlers who came from the sea to occupy our land. Every color shown the area occupied by them in Palestine in the course of about 8 months. You can see that the area shown here is what's called today Israel. There is hardly any acre in this land, which is called Israel today, is not owned by Palestinians or was not inhabited by Palestinians. Israel today cannot claim any acre, any kilometer of the land it calls Israel obtained by any means other than by military force. So this is then the body of the crime. All what you see here are the areas occupied by Zionist settlers who came from Russia and Poland and make Palestinians refugees. Can I see the next one, please? This great calamity, this great crime, unprecedented in history, could not have happened easily. It happened by a series of massacres in the villages. All the blue points you see are villages in which the Haganah committed massacres against the people in that village. And in that area, for example, I have shown here only northern Palestine. All the blue points are places where massacres have been committed against Palestinians. Next one, please. As a result of these massacres, all these villages, shown in blue again, have been depopulated. People were expelled. I mean, they go to a village, they kill anywhere from 20 to 200, and the others are pushed away and expelled to be refugees. That is why I said there is not 1 kilometer taken by Israel today except by force and by crimes. These series of crimes, we recorded 156 crimes. But by the way, I must let you know, Celine and others, that all these crimes I'm showing here has taken place by the Haganah, the Israeli force, before there was something called Israel. All this was committed before 14th of May 1948. These crimes committed by the Haganah who came from Poland and Russia before Israel was declared. And tragically, it has taken place when the British were supposed to be in Palestine to defend the Palestinians, but they didn't. The British were still there. They did not stop these massacres. The third point, which should be known to all those who listen to the Israeli propaganda, third point is that all these crimes you see have taken place before any Arab regular soldier entered Palestine to save them. Unfortunately, when they came, they were not able to save them. So this takes us to the next slide. This describes a Nakba. What is a Nakba? The depopulation of all these villages shown in red points and expelling their population. The next one. When people were expelled, Palestine became empty. It became empty, and all the people, life was extinguished in so many hundreds of towns and villages in Palestine. Palestine became empty, ready for new settlers from Europe to come and occupy it. The third slide, please. Next one. And what happened to the people of these villages? They became refugees. They sought refuge in what's left in Palestine, which is Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and in the neighboring Arab countries. So these three slides show you what Nakba is. It is a crime unprecedented in history. It is a stain in the history of any civilized country. Certainly, it is a black stain in the history of Israel, which will never be forgotten or forgiven before the right of return. Now, we need to study how we can actually implement the right of return. Look at this map. It's very clear. The green areas here are the village lands of the refugees. Refugees have been expelled from these village lands. When I say village, I mean village location of the houses and village land which belongs to the village. All these green areas you see, when we did a meticulous study, have no Jews today or have very little Jews in the kibbutz. So all of these green areas are ready to receive the people. Then you people will ask me, where are the Jews in Israel living? They are living in the blue area here, which is the land they got during the British Mandate. And where are the cities? Cities are shown in the brown areas, which come next. Brown areas comes next. These brown areas are the city lands. And we can also show one small area in which the Jews took over Palestinian land as a majority. So this situation, what does it tell you? It tells you the Jews are concentrated in Israel in these blue circles. Next slide, please. Next one. Next one. All right. These blue circles show you the concentration of Israeli Jews today. They are located around Tel Aviv and in Western Jerusalem and in Haifa. 87% of Israeli Jews live in less than 10% of Israel's area. So if you click next one, so there is nothing preventing the Palestinians from the depopulated villages here, shown in red dots, to return. There is no problem of returning Palestinians to their land with the minimum dislocation of the present occupants, even assuming if they have rights. The key question in this return plan, is this, that you cannot actually implement peaceful plan at all, or you cannot bring peace in the region without abolishing Zionism, without abolishing apartheid, without abolishing occupation, without abolishing racism. This is a condition for any peace in the future. We can learn from the last 80 years and the history of the world, especially in Europe. All the evil regimes have been ended, have been stopped, have been eliminated, like apartheid South Africa, like colonialism in Asia and Africa, like all the occupation of countries in Europe or any country, like all the evil regimes have been terminated, because the world cannot tolerate evil to last so long against innocent people. Now we can actually think positively. Can I see next slide, please? We can think positively. Now we have the right to return. Do we know where the people can return? Do we know what to do with their villages? If their houses, they are destroyed, how can we rebuild them? We have the answer to that. Here is a sample. I'll give you one sample. Kula village is in Ramla district. We can locate Kula in our maps. Click one. Here is Kula before 1948, in a large scale of 250,000, in a smaller scale of 200,000, in even smaller scale of 20,000, all before 1948. We know everything about Kula. We know its houses, we know its land, and so on. After 1948, we have also maps. After 1948, it's still there, 1955, 1960, and then Israelis planted settlements, colonies around it, like this one, and then they destroyed the village, which you can see in the blank area in the middle, white area. The village is demolished completely, but we know everything about it. We know the people of the Kula. So we have two tasks then. First of all, to bring the people of Kula back. Now we know where they are in the blue right-hand side table. These are the camps in Jordan where they live today. And we know the routes they can follow to go back to Kula, shown in black line. So we know how many are they in which camp. We know we can arrange for them in buses to go. Some of them can walk, and they know the road back to Qula. Now, we'll take one case of a family in Qula, appropriately called Qalawla, and they live in Muzdar camp. Now, these people, this is their village. We maintain and keep aerial photo of the village before it's destroyed. And we have the young people like you, Celine, who are studying architecture. Their job, their graduation project is to rebuild Qula. So this young lady, we'll see in a moment, have actually made her graduation project to rebuild her village. Her name is Rula, and she is a young architect who just graduated. She took the maps and information about Qula and redesigned the village for the new people 10 times more than before. She rebuilt that village completely. This is her design for Qula in the 21st century. We can do this with the talent of our young people. We have enough engineers, architects, labor. We can do this without the help of anybody. We don't need aid. The cost of reconstruction of all destroyed Palestinian villages is less than the amount of aid given by United States to Israel in 1 year. In other words, we do not have to receive an aid at all from anybody. And the United States will be relieved, and its taxpayers will be relieved from paying the duty to Israel every year. So peace is also not only possible, but it's also cheap. And we really have to see the world in this light. We cannot actually accept that the evil should go on. As I said, in all history, all these evil projects have been terminated. And you could say, but we don't have the power. You mean the military power? Yes, we don't have that. But we have the right on our hand and our hearts, in our minds. We have something which very few people in the world have. We have the sumud. We have persisted since Balfour 100 years ago. We never gave up. We never surrendered. The point is, never give up your right of return, no matter how long it takes, no matter how difficult it is. And you young people, again, I say 75% of the Palestinians, which that means about 9 million people, should not ever forget your right of return. And it is not really a fancy idea, not at all. In the year 2030, we will be 18 million people, 18 million people. Of the 18 million, 9 of them will be on the soil of Palestine. And they will be more numerous than Israeli Jews. That is in terms of numbers. If they stick to their right of return, if they never give up their right to their land, then no doubt, sooner or later, they will succeed. And I would say this is the message I pass on to young people like you. This is the message which our parents told us, and we tell it to you. And the key question is, if you give up your right of return, you drop that right, and nobody will come to you to help you. But if you maintain in your heart and your mind and your effort and your talent and your intellect and your endeavors and your travail, you should never give up that right. And you will win, because waging 11 wars against a people, it's unprecedented. And I don't think it will work in the long term. You cannot just wipe out history and wipe out geography. You cannot just tell people that Palestine in the heart of the Arab world, where you can never go from Cairo to Damascus without crossing Palestine. You cannot ignore the land in which Jesus Christ walked. You cannot ignore the villages described by Eusebius in the year 313. And we have records of them. They are still existing until 1948, we found that of the villages described by Eusebius in the year AD 313, 139 of them were still in existence in 1948, destroyed by Israel, a crime against humanity, which will not last. I believe in the spirit, the human spirit. I believe it will never fail to attain its goal. The question is, stay on, don't forget, keep, keep, keep up your right. Don't give it up. If you give it up, nobody will give it back to you. So you stay on that course and you will succeed.
Thank you, Dr. Salman Abu Sittir. That was a very data-rich, impressive overview of the situation, the history of the situation, and your solution. So thank you. And that leads on to a question from the audience, who asks, how can people mobilize for the Palestinian right to return?
How people are mobilized for the right of return.
How can they mobilize for it?
How can they mobilize? Yes. Before I answer that question, I would like to say that Palestine will rise from the ashes. We have done it before, and we will do it. And I would say also that this child who is doing his homework, his main wish in the world is to return home. He will return home. All of us will return home if we continue on this course. What can we do to mobilize? It's you do in everything in your ability. For example, you could, for example, wherever you are, mobilize people around you, saying, this is my right, this is my home. I am not attacking anybody. I am not taking anybody's home. I want my home. I want my own. We are not asking something and belongs to other people. We just ask for our own. You tell them by voice, by use the social media. It is now a weapon which is very powerful. You know why? In my time, we could not publish anything. They will not allow to publish. If we speak, we're not allowed to speak. In my time, we could not travel to any country to speak about Palestine. Now, you young people are found in every city in the world, almost. All right? You are at universities, study at the universities, make lectures, make groups, like all the groups you mentioned you are part of. Tell people, because I would imagine that most people in the world are good-hearted people. They may be misled by their governments. So talk to them, generate friendly groups. Even I, for example, deal with a number of Jewish groups. When I speak in the United States, almost 1/3 of my audience are young American Jews. They tell me Zionism cheated us. They took us to school, told us that Palestine, there's no Palestine, it's empty land, and God gave us Israel. And we never heard that they depopulated the whole people of Palestine. They never heard about that. And so keep doing that. Make groups. Use the media. If you are in a country where you are a citizen, go to your MP. Tell him or her that you cannot speak in my name if you condone war crimes or violation of international law. You have to stand by international law, or we will expose you, will not elect you. You have to shame them if they don't have the courage. We know that many are defamed, as I mentioned before, by the Zionists, defamed, and we know the stories about people who speak, but this should not be a deterrent. On the contrary, the more you see that people are hiding the crimes, the more you should be more enthusiastic to change that picture. And I have seen really many, many good people where I thought there were no hope of them be in our side. But the moment they know They mostly change their mind, mostly, not always, but they mostly. And in this connection, let me just make a little peaceful advertisement. Go to the website of Palestine Land Society. We have an immense amount of material, all scientifically based. There is no propaganda, there is no political analysis or this and that. Facts, 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 facts. Go and use that. And the maps are there. And if you need any more information, we will provide it.
Thank you. We got a second question from an audience member who is asking, is there space for 7.2 million Palestinian refugees to return?
Is this what? Sorry, I'd like to hear the question.
Is there space for, wait, can you hear me?
I'm sorry,
sorry.
The line is not clear.
Is there space for
Is it safe?
Oh, is there space for 7.2?
Is there a space for 7 million? Yeah. I answered that by saying the land of 500 Palestinian villages from which refugees were expelled is still empty. The people who occupy this land are the kibbutz. As I said, almost 240 have no Jews today at all. And another similar number have only the kibbutz. Who are the kibbutz? The total number of kibbutz, the population of kibbutz is 1 or 2% of Israeli Jews. They are planted in the village land of refugees for the sole purpose of preventing the refugees to return. They gave them our land to plant, and they are supposed to earn a living from agriculture. But agriculture in Israel accounts for 1% of the GDP. So it is not really viable economically. And another point, which is found in the papers we published, 88% of the area, including the kibbutz and other areas with no kibbutz, is controlled by the Israeli army for training, for camps, for factories. So Israel really makes itself, and which is it is itself, is a big military base. And now I don't think people should be deprived from their homes for the sake of building a military base for expansion, for occupation, for causing havoc in the region for at least 72 years.
Thank you. Our next question is, what is the reason behind Israel's staunch breach of international law by denying Palestinian refugees their right of return?
What is the reason for Israel to do that?
Israel's breach of international law by denying the Palestinian right to return.
Well, you can ask Herzl about that. He was trying to find a place for the Jews who refused to be European citizens, and they lived in ghettos, and they wanted to find a haven for them. They did not want to be citizens of the country. Let me go back here a little bit in history. In the 19th century, in the age of enlightenment, Europe has undergone a great revolution. They created nationalities for each country. If you are in Germany or Poland or France, you are a citizen of that country. You have equal rights to like anybody else. Now, most of the Jews accepted that, and they became citizens of these countries without any question. Some of them escaped the Russian pogroms by immigrating to the United States. There is a small group of Jews who wanted to maintain the life of the ghetto, so they wanted to create a nation based on the ghetto. In other words, to be a nation, a ghetto was made into a nation. And those tried other areas in the world. Finally, with Balfour Declaration, they got that opportunity in Palestine. It is ironic that Britain does that. And Balfour did that. He is the one in 1905 prevented the entry of European Jews to United Kingdom. He enacted the Aliens Law in 1905, preventing European Jews from immigrating to the United Kingdom. So the opportunity came after the First World War when Britain occupied Palestine. They said, here is a good opportunity. Let us put the Jews of Europe in Palestine and use them to serve our interests. They will be a military base for the British to protect the Suez Canal. And they did that. And even today, Israel is acting like a Western military post. You must have seen an interview by one US congressman who said, if there is no Israel today, how can we control the Arab world? We would need a big fleet and many million, thousands of soldiers. So Israel fills that function for the West, but it is, of course, in the long term. It's a very it's an objective which will backfire in the end, because it turns people against the invader and the occupier. So that's why I am sure that the future of this Zionist regime in Israel is not certain. Let me give you a similar example. There are many cases in which colonies are created in the middle of a homogeneous nation. Like, for example, Goa in Western India, it was created by the Portuguese, and India could not actually absorb a colony in its middle, in its side, like Cis. And therefore, the Goa returned back to India and the Portuguese left. Another case, Hong Kong was controlled by the British for hundreds of years. And in the end, Hong Kong returned to its motherland, which is China. You cannot create artificial posts in the middle of a homogeneous nation. And you can do it by force, but when force recedes or when things change, that will not be possible anymore. And I believe that the Zionism and the Israeli apartheid policies and racist policies will have no future whatsoever.
There's a question from the audience that ties into that, where they ask, due to Britain's involvement in the creation of Israel, do they hold responsibility in granting the right of return?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question slowly?
Sorry. Due to Britain's involvement in the creation of Israel, do they hold responsibility in granting the right of return?
Oh, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Britain is the source of evil in this story. Britain has done unimaginable damage to Palestine, not only by creating Israel in 1948, but from day one when Balfour declared his infamous declaration. Let me answer that in some detail. Britain was entrusted as it's called sacred trust of civilization to make Palestine an independent free country for the welfare of its people. It betrayed that trust, and actually it worked against that, not only by inflicting Palestine with a flood of European settlers. Not only that, but in 1936 to 1939, when Palestinians revolted against the flood which threatened their life, Britain, with utmost brutality, quelled the revolt of Palestinians. For the first time ever, they dropped bombs on Palestinian villages. They killed tens of thousands of people. They imprisoned many, many people. They destroyed villages completely. They created the so-called collective punishment. They disbanded all the political parties. So by 1939, I call this the year of the British inflicted Nakba. Palestinians became completely defenseless. So the following years, the Second World War, at the end of that, Ben Gurion was ready to bounce in Palestine. 10 years later, Ben Gurion inflicted the Zionist inflicted Nakba on Palestine. And so Britain is the criminal number one in this story, and not only against human rights, not only against international law, which was not accepted at the time, but also against its own undertaking. It's against its own undertaking. Therefore, there has been and will be many cases of bringing Britain to court. But this is a lengthy process, but we should never give it up.
Thank you. Another question we have is there a connection between Israel's residency policy of Palestinians in Jerusalem and their denial of the Palestinian right to return?
Well, all Israeli policies are based on the principle that all Palestine is to be Israel, and the people on the land who are the Palestinians are to be tolerated, but gradually to be removed from that. The July 2018 Israeli law, a nation-state law, simply is an epitome of apartheid and racism. It says that Palestine, all of it, is Israel for the Jews, and probably even outside that in the Golan and other places, that it is a place, it's the homeland for all the Jews in the world. Imagine there is no country in the world which says all the people of one religion have one country to belong to them. At the same time, they are living in all other countries as citizens. It's unusual. And therefore, they will try, if not by direct military means, by all means, like the blockade in Gaza, like denying papers for Palestinians in Jerusalem, eliminating their residence permits, all the checkpoints, all these are intended to empty Palestine from its people. So that's why we say a Nakba is ongoing. And therefore, again, I say there can be, when there are people who say negotiate, you cannot negotiate with people who deny you existed. You cannot negotiate with people who say you are not there, you are a speck of dust. You cannot negotiate with people whose racism and apartheid says, I took your land and I wouldn't want you to be there, and God gave it to me no matter what you say. The greatest tragedy, if this story happens in any century, or if it is not supported by the West, people would laugh at this. How can you actually pluck out, evacuate 560,000 villages from their homes by massacres and by barbarity and by constant denial of their return? For example, the Israelis say, oh, it was war and people left because they were afraid of war. Supposing that's the case, which is not the case, supposing that's the case, to expel people is a war crime. But there is another war crime not mentioned, to deny that they return home. A lot of people left places of battle or of conflict. The British themselves in London, they left London in the Second World War and went to the countryside because London was not safe. After the war ended, they returned back. So Israel committed at least two crimes. One, to expel the people of Palestine. Two, to prevent their return. Although, as I said, the international law on their side.
Thank you. What is the urgency of implementing the Palestinian right of return?
I think the urgency is very, very clear, very clear. We are now 13 million people, and we have a country called Palestine, and it is well defined by the National Charter of Palestinians in 1968 that we are a people of Palestine, and this is our country from Ras al Naqura to Rashas in the south. We are the people of this country. We are one people. This is our country. These simple facts must be emphasized. We are not a group of refugees. We are not a collection of refugee camps. We are a people who have a country, people well defined, a country is well defined. And therefore, the National Charter in 1964 said that. And from it, we have the greatest political achievement, forming Palestine National Council, a council made of about 300 to 400 people representing all Palestine, and they speak on behalf of Palestinian people. This democratic representation is our biggest achievement. I am a member of that council, Palestine National Council. Unfortunately, after the disaster of Oslo, this Palestine National Council has been reduced in value and minimized, trivialized. Now, I think the main duty for every Palestinian, including you young people, is to insist on new elections in which 13 million people, 3/4 of them are young people, to be represented in the new Palestine National Council. And from that council, there will be a new leadership which insists on our rights, defends our rights, fight for our rights. And that is important for you young people because we leave Palestine for you. You have 50, 60, 70 years to live. And the inheritance we leave for you is Palestine. So it is your right to demand very vigorously by grouping, by presentation, by forming parties, by doing everything possible. You say, I have the right to be represented in the Palestine National Council. Let me tell you, there are at least half a dozen groups. We have one of them and many others insisting on elections of a new Palestine National Council. And at the same time, having no recognition of the existing setup because people have to be re-elected. And people are the people who decide. We cannot stay with the same people who have been 30 years ago not re-elected. There is nothing like that in democracy. People should be elected every 4 years. So my advice, my word for young people like you, Celine, you have to insist that your right to be represented in Palestine National Council must be respected, must be implemented, and that the reverse of that is not acceptable. Not acceptable. You can join many of the groups and many of the activities which claim for that, and you put your name and you make your voice heard because it's your future Palestine which is in question.
Thank you. We have a question from Maha Bakir, who is asking, what about those whose homes are occupied by Israelis living there since 1948? How would they get their homes back?
Yes, good question to our friend Maha Bakir. there are about 1.5 million Palestinians under the rule of Israeli government in Palestine, 1948, and one quarter of them are refugees. Refugees like anybody else. Who is a refugee? Someone expelled from his home and put somewhere else. Whether this somewhere else is 1 kilometer away, or 10 kilometers away, or 1,000 kilometers away, he's still a refugee. So, first of all, they must demand the right of return inside so called Israel. This is their right. Secondly, they live under apartheid law, as we mentioned. Now, this is under the nation state law, it's even made legal. I would remind people who are watching us, in 1948, Ben Gurion would not dare to say that. He said Palestinians and Jews and so on live in Israel like equal citizens. He's not doing that. They always lie and they always change. So Palestinians in 1948, they are now actually, I can see embers of a new national spirit. It started in 1976, and now they are claiming for their rights. Some are claiming for their rights absolutely, like Palestinians, to be free citizens. Others claim their rights within the Israeli law, and under the so-called Musawa. But I think this is a vain hope, because in the end, your enemy is the one who denies your existence. So let there be a strong national movement in 1948, which is still there, but I hope it will develop into a strong force. And they have the advantage that they can tell the world, when people say Israel is democracy, they can tell them, look, Israel is not democracy. I am the son of this land, and I have no rights like the one who just arrived from a smuggler ship from Poland. I don't have the same right like that. So they have a duty, and I think they are doing it. I hope at least they can join forces and become united in their endeavor.
Thank you, Dr. Salman Abu Sittir. That was a really informative session. And I agree with your call for young people to speak up for the right to return. And one of the ways they can do it is by signing the My Return petition and donating to UNRWA as well to help the condition of refugees. Thank you so much for having us. Tomorrow's final event is The Right of Return 72 Years Waiting, which will be at 7 p.m. Thank you all for watching, and thank you again, Dr. Salman Abu Sittir, for this.
Thank you, Celine. Thank you. Let me repeat my message to you and people like you, young people. You should never give up. You should never give up. To sign that return is my right and my decision is important, but it is not the end of the story. It's only the first step. After, if you have a right and you say it's my right, you have to fight for it. You have to let people know about it. You have to do everything possible to get it. You have the right, you have the history, you have the geography on your side. And therefore, ultimately, you are bound to succeed, because the enemy who is stopping you from that is using forces beyond your control, like the United States. These have a lifetime, limited lifetime. It could not stay long. I mean, we know what happened to Nazi Germany, what happened to communist Russia, what happened to fascist Italy, what happened to South Africa. All of them have gone. So we should not be discouraged by the size of the strength of the enemy. It's only military, physical strength. It has no equivalent in rights and determination. So we should keep doing that. Let me just make a small comment. It's good of you to mention donate for UNRWA. But let me tell you that UNRWA is the duty of the United Nations. United Nations proposed a plan in 1947 to divide Palestine between part governed by the Jewish government keeping the Palestinians there, and the other one governed by Arab government in which there are no Jews. Now, this scheme was only a suggestion. The partition plan is a suggestion, a proposal. It has no legal value. Israel, as I have just explained, Zionists, before they formed Israel, attacked Palestine and took Palestine by force. All right? So, the United Nations passed Resolution 194, allowing for the refugees to return. But if you look carefully at this resolution, it has three elements. Element number one, allowing the refugees to return. Number two, forming an organization for the relief of the refugees until they return. The third one, forming a new mechanism called UN Conciliation Commission of Palestine, whose job is to allow and organize the return of the refugees. Now, Israel refused to allow the return of refugees, and they refused for UNCCP to function, and they agreed that UNRWA would continue. Why? Because it's their duty for relief and help of the people they made refugees. So they were happy that the United Nations took upon itself to do that job. And that is why UNRWA is the only agency of the United Nations which reports directly to the General Assembly. Thank God, America cannot veto that because it is an organization of the General Assembly. And therefore, it's the duty of the United Nations to do that. What happens in the early 1950s? United States paid a lot of money, the biggest contributor, to UNRWA. Why did they do that? Not because they like Palestinians, because they want to relieve Israel from the burden of taking care of the refugees or allowing them to return. And they were afraid at the time that the Palestinian refugees will cause revolution in the area. And so the best way is to keep them quiet. And they paid the money, most of the money, United States and Europe, to help Israel and to stop a possible crime, to possible war in the region. Now, Trump, with the help of Zionist contingent living right in the White House, writing all the decrees of the White House, signing papers, they are writing all the decrees and the orders and so on, and Trump is just signing them. They now say, oh, okay, what can they do now? They are weak. So let us get the aid out of UNRWA and force them to become permanent refugees. And then in fulfillment of the nation state law, let the Israelis take over Palestine, all of it, and call it Israel. And so, although I appreciate your call for donating to UNRWA, I would suggest something else. I would suggest, instead of donating to UNRWA, to make representations to the United Nations, to all members of parliament, saying it is the duty of the General Assembly to keep UNRWA alive. If you do that, you are against international law. You have to support UNRWA function because the duty of financing it falls on the people who created the problem in the first place. So what you should do, you make legal presentation to the United Nations, to every member state of 173 who are on our side, to say UNRWA is an obligation of the United Nations and must continue. And if you don't do that, you are advocating war crimes, you are advocating violation of international law. So I would advise to support UNRWA by methods, legal methods, by media methods, by presentation methods. This is the best way to keep it. Otherwise, what can you do? You can, earn some money. It's a lot of money. So the question is not to fill the gap of the broken jar, leaking water. That's not the answer. The answer is to replaces with another jar which holds the water. And that is, you go back to the General Assembly, members of the General Assembly, namely talk to your MPs, your parliament, media, and so on, saying that if you destroy UNRWA, you are advocating violation of international law, you are creating a big havoc, you are supporting apartheid, you are supporting racism, you are supporting occupation. And anyone who would say that publicly, I don't think they will, but they will be responsible for that action.
I agree entirely with your suggestion, and hopefully the audience acts on it. And thank you so much for your passionate approach to the issue, and thank you for your new perspective on the UNRWA topic. I'll definitely be trying to do your way, which is to talk to my MP, hopefully. Thank you so much.
Celine, I hope it is more legal and more factual and more correct than passionate. Passion, we cannot spare that because we are Palestinians. But before it's passion, it's a fact, it's a right, it's legal, and it's a history and geography. And no civilized person in the world would dare to delete history and geography because it will backfire on you one day or another.
I think you're completely right. We have facts on our side. And thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Lovely.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
If the petition letter being sent to the United Nations in order to solidify the right of return for the Palestinian refugees represents you, this is your chance to add your signature and make your voice heard. Enter the website at www.myreturn.net. Enter your details, your name, email, and the town of origin from which you or your family were exiled. Fill in the relevant fields to secure your data, then sign in the box. You have only completed half of the steps. To fully complete the form, you must log on to your email and open the email from the campaign. If you cannot find the email, check your spam folder. Click on Verify to activate your signature. Congratulations! Your participation in the petition has now been confirmed. Return. My right. My decision.
أنا جاي جنبك لفلسطين. لو مرت أعوام، لو صلبت أحلام، لو كسرت أقلام، حتما ستعود فلسطين. العودة حقي وقراري، وكذاك طريق الأحرار. في جيبي مفتاح الدار، سأعود لأرض فلسطين. العودة حقي وقراري، وكذاك طريق الأحرار. في جيبي مفتاح الدار، سأعود لأرض فلسطين. Seni unutup gitmem, sensiz hiç olmam. Sevdim sever seveceğim, döneceğim bekle Filistin. لو طال الأسر، لو محيا الفجر، لو نفذ الصبر، حتما ستعود فلسطين. العودة حقي وقراري،